a quiet corner, and a loud boss. The digital clock on Oliver's phone glowed 7:45 a.m., an internal alarm that always meant time to face the music. He took a deep breath, the chill morning air a crisp counterpoint to the lukewarm coffee sloshing in his travel mug. The usual symphony of the city was beginning, the distant thrum of traffic, the sharp chirp of sparrows from the elm tree outside his window, and the muffled chatter of his neighbors already descending to the street. He liked the quiet anticipation of the morning, a buffer before the full-blown chaos of the workday. Stepping into the office of Thorne and Company was like entering a different ecosystem. The hushed reverence of the lobby, all polished marble and brushed steel, gave way to the energetic hum of the open-plan office. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the faint ozone smell of overworked electronics, and the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of keyboards created a percussive background to the low murmur of conversations. Oliver navigated the maze of desks, offering a small nod to Sarah in accounting and a quick, shy smile to James in marketing. He found his own corner, a somewhat secluded desk tucked beside a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a glimpse of the city's relentless upward climb. He liked his little perch, a quiet observation point amidst the controlled frenzy. He had barely settled, his fingers tracing the cool metal of his monitor stand, when a shadow fell across his desk. Oliver didn't need to look up. The air in his immediate vicinity had grown noticeably colder, thicker. "Read." The voice was like a precisely tuned instrument, and each syllable delivered with an almost surgical precision. Vincent Thorne, CEO, and undeniable emperor of this bustling kingdom, stood by Oliver's desk, a sheaf of papers clutched in one hand. Vincent was a man carved from ambition, sharp angles, and an unyielding gaze that seemed to pierce through pleasantries. His dark suit, always impeccable, seemed to absorb the light around him, making his presence feel even more formidable. Oliver looked up, trying to appear composed. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne." Vincent's eyes, the color of storm clouds, scanned the report in his hand. "This projection for the Northwood account. The quarterly growth rate is optimistic, Reed. Alarmingly so." Oliver felt a familiar prickle of heat rise in his cheeks. "I based it on last year's Q3 performance and factored in the recent market shift in renewable energy, sir. I believe it's a reasonable..." "Reasonable is a comfort blanket, Reed," Vincent interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I expect foresight, not wishful thinking. Did you account for the proposed governmental tariff changes, the projected increase in raw material costs, or were you simply adding 5% to last year's figures and hoping for the best?" Oliver swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He had, in fact, considered those factors, but Vincent's rapid-fire questioning always threw him off balance. He struggled to articulate his thought process under the intense scrutiny. "I did, sir. The tariff changes are still speculative, and I included a contingency margin for raw materials, say albeit a conservative one." Vincent merely raised an eyebrow, a gesture that spoke volumes. "Conservative, Reed, is not the same as comprehensive. Redo this. I want a worst-case scenario alongside your best, with detailed justifications for both. On my desk by lunch." He dropped the papers onto Oliver's desk with a soft thud that felt like a gavel striking. Then, without another word, he turned and strode away, leaving a faint scent of expensive cologne and an even fainter tremor in Oliver's hands. Oliver watched him go, feeling the familiar knot tighten in his stomach. It wasn't just the criticism. It was the way Vincent delivered it, devoid of any warmth, any acknowledgement of effort. It made Oliver feel small, insignificant, like a cog in a machine that was perpetually on the verge of breaking down. And rough start to the day. A friendly voice broke through Oliver's swirling thoughts. Mark Mac Thompson, his desk neighbor and office confidant, appeared beside him, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. Mac was a burst of sunshine in the often grey landscape of the office, his bright blue shirt and perpetually tousled hair a stark contrast to Vincent's muted severity. "You heard," Oliver managed, trying to sound nonchalant. Mac leaned in conspiratorially. "The whole floor heard. Vincent's optimistic radar is always set to maximum. Don't take it to heart, mate. He's just..." "Vincent." Mac paused, then added, "What was it this time? A misplaced comma? A slightly off-center graph?" Oliver sighed, pushing the report back towards himself. "The northward projection. He thinks I'm too optimistic, wants a worst-case scenario by lunch," while Mac whistled softly. "That's a tall order, but you'll nail it. You always do. You just need to learn to grow a thicker skin with him." Oliver picked up his pen, tracing the lines on the report without really seeing them. "It's not just the criticism, Mac. It's the coldness. He never offers a word of encouragement, never a good job. It's always just what I've done wrong, or what I could have done better." He looked up, meeting Mac's sympathetic gaze. "It makes me feel like I'm constantly disappointing him, no matter what I do." Mac clapped him on the shoulder, a comforting, firm gesture. "He's a driven man, Ollie. And he's got the weight of this whole company on his shoulders. He probably thinks praise makes people complacent. Or maybe he just doesn't know how to give it." He winked. "Don't let him get to you. Hubbing, you're good at what you do. We all know it, even if he doesn't say it." Oliver offered a weak smile. Mac's words were a balm, but they didn't quite soothe the sting left by Vincent's words. He knew Mac was right about Vincent's pressures, had even seen glimpses of it in the dark circles under his eyes on particularly stressful weeks. But understanding didn't always make the sharpness of Vincent's interactions any easier to bear. He looked down at the report, the numbers now feeling like an insurmountable mountain. He had a lot of work to do, and very little time to do it in. The unyielding standard. The mingled scents of stale coffee and printer toner enveloped Oliver as he hunched over his keyboard, the monitor's glow a solitary beacon in the hushed office. Hours had melted away since Mac's encouraging words, each one poured into refining the worst-case scenario projections. He'd devoured every industry report, rigorously tested every variable, even accounted for a hypothetical alien invasion, just for good measure. He aimed to leave no stone unturned, no contingency unexamined, determined to counter Vincent's initial optimism and demonstrate his foresight for every impending storm, especially those brewing in Thorne's perpetually turbulent mind. He scanned the executive summary one last time, an unconscious gesture smoothing an imaginary wrinkle on the digital page. The numbers were stark, a grim counterpoint to his earlier, hopeful outlook, yet they were meticulously researched, impeccably presented. This wasn't mere data. It was a bulwark against Thorne's inevitable scrutiny. At precisely 11:58 a.m., Oliver entered Vincent's office. Brenda, Vincent's impeccably coiffed assistant, glanced up, her gaze subtly assessing. "He's expecting you, Oliver." Her voice, a low hum, contrasted sharply with the clatter of the keyboard he'd just abandoned. She offered a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. A connoisseur of office dynamics, Brenda seemed to sense the gravity of this particular presentation. Vincent sat behind his vast mahogany desk, a polished monolith that seemed to absorb all light and warmth. He didn't immediately look up, absorbed in a document. The air in the room felt thin, colder than outside, despite the thermostat's hum. Oliver laid the printed report on the corner of the desk, the crisp white paper stark against the dark wood. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, Vincent finally lifted his eyes, their intense blue piercing Oliver's carefully constructed composure. "Read." His voice was a flat statement, devoid of inflection. He picked up the report, his fingers surprisingly long and elegant, turning the pages with deliberate slowness. Oliver stood silently, hands clasped behind his back, every muscle tensed, watching Vincent's face for any flicker of reaction, any acknowledgement of the hours, the skipped lunch. the gnawing anxiety woven into those pages. Vincent's gaze swept over a graph, then a table of figures. He paused, his brow furrowing almost imperceptibly, and pointed a finger at a small footnote. This assumption here, Reed. You've used the lower end of the market volatility index. Why not the median? Oliver's heart sank a fraction. Sir, historical data for this quarter indicates a slight stabilization, suggesting the lower end is a more conservative yet realistic projection for a worst-case scenario. Vincent merely grunted, moving on. He continued to pore over the document, occasionally tapping a page, his silence more deafening than any shout. He identified another minor discrepancy, a decimal point that invited debate. He questioned a source, then the methodology for a projection curve. Each observation was precise, surgical, dissecting the report without ever acknowledging the fundamental effort it represented. Finally, he closed the binder, its thud echoing in the quiet room. He leaned back, eyes fixed on Oliver. It's adequate, Reed. The revisions are noted. Adequate. The word hung in the air. A lead weight. Not good. Not excellent. Just adequate. Oliver felt a familiar pang of disappointment, a dull ache behind his ribs. He had chased perfection, only to be met with a lukewarm acceptance that felt colder than outright rejection. He yearned to scream, to explain the late nights, the meticulous research, the sheer mental gymnastics involved. He wanted Vincent to see the effort, the dedication, the quiet pride he'd felt in building something so thoroughly. But Vincent's gaze was already distant, already moving on to the next item on his mental agenda. Anything else, sir? Oliver asked, his voice tighter than intended. No, Reed. You may go. Vincent's eyes had already returned to the document on his desk, dismissing Oliver as effortlessly as he had dismissed his work. Oliver turned, the crisp white binder still sitting on the corner of Vincent's desk, a testament to his hours of labor, now rendered merely adequate. As he walked out, Brenda caught his eye, her expression softening with a silent understanding. But even her sympathy couldn't mend the small tear in his spirit. He had tried so hard to meet Vincent's unyielding standard, and all he'd found was another wall. The shudder and the stillness. The digital clock on Oliver's desk glowed 6:58 a.m. 2 minutes until his mandated arrival time, a new directive from Vincent intended to ensure Oliver was prepared and present for the day's unforgiving schedule. He gathered his meticulously organized notes for the morning's budget review, the heavy binder a familiar weight in his hands. The lingering sting of Vincent's adequate still pricked at him, a dull ache beneath the surface of his practiced composure. He still had so much to prove. Stepping into the deserted hallway, the polished marble reflected the pre-dawn glow filtering through the massive arched windows. He reached the elevator bank just as a familiar figure emerged from the executive suite, a shadow against the distant light. Vincent. A jolt of surprise, followed by a familiar knot in Oliver's stomach. Vincent, typically arriving at an hour so early it bordered on the previous day, was already in the office. They had never shared an elevator before, their paths usually divergent by minutes that felt like miles. Vincent, impeccably tailored as always, offered a curt nod that seemed more acknowledgement of Oliver's existence than a greeting. "Reed," he stated, his voice a low rumble. He pressed the down arrow, and the doors to the closest car hissed open. Oliver hesitated for a fraction of a second. The space felt suddenly charged, and too small for the unspoken history and current tension between them. But there was no other option. The other elevators remained stubbornly on upper floors. He stepped inside, positioning himself respectfully to Vincent's left, near the panel of gleaming buttons. The subtle scent of Vincent's cologne, a crisp, almost metallic aroma, filled the confined space. Vincent pressed the ground floor button. The doors slid shut with a soft click, plunging them into a momentary hush. The elevator began its descent. A smooth, almost imperceptible glide. Oliver focused on the shifting numbers above the door, trying to regulate his breathing, acutely aware of Vincent's proximity. Then, a low groan emanated from somewhere above them, a sound like stressed metal. Oliver's gaze snapped to Vincent, whose brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. A tremor ran through the floor, a subtle vibration that quickly intensified. The groan escalated into a high-pitched shriek, like a banshee trapped in the building's infrastructure. Oliver instinctively reached out, his hand flying to brace himself against the cool metal wall. The tremor became a violent shudder, rattling his teeth. The elevator car lurched sideways, then dropped with a sickening suddenness that stole his breath. He heard a choke sound, a gasp, and realized it had come from him. His stomach lurched, a roller coaster in freefall. With a final bone-jarring thud, the elevator slammed to a halt. The impact threw Oliver forward, and he stumbled, catching himself before he could collide with Vincent. The shriek died, replaced by a deafening silence. For a beat, the only sound was the ragged thumping of Oliver's own heart in his ears. The emergency lights, usually a soft glow, flickered once, twice, a dying gasp of illumination. Then, with a pop, they extinguished completely. Darkness, absolute and suffocating, enveloped them. The sudden, complete void pressed in, disorienting Oliver. He blinked, but there was nothing to see. The familiar outline of Vincent, the elevator buttons, the polished floor, all gone, swallowed by the inky black. He felt the rapid flutter of panic begin to take root in his chest, a cold tendril coiling around his lungs. He struggled to draw a full breath. "What was that?" Oliver heard himself ask, his voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to the booming confidence he usually tried to project in Vincent's presence. The question hung in the heavy air, went unanswered for a moment. Then Vincent's voice, surprisingly calm despite the jarring events, cut through the silence. "Stay calm, Reed." His tone, however, held a new, unfamiliar edge, a hint of something less controlled than Oliver had ever heard. The silence returned, deeper now, punctuated only by their shared, uneven breathing. The air in the elevator felt suddenly thick, heavy with the metallic scent of fear and the lingering aroma of Vincent's cologne. Oliver strained his ears, listening for any sign of movement, any sound from beyond their metal cage. There was nothing, just the profound, unsettling stillness. First cracks in the wall. The oppressive darkness pressed in, thick and absolute. Oliver's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He could hear Vincent's ragged breaths, surprisingly close, cutting through the heavy silence. A faint scent of ozone and something metallic, acrid, clung to the air. "Thorn." Vincent's voice, though strained, still carried an edge of authority. "Are you all right?" Oliver coughed, the dust in his throat abrasive. "Yes, sir. Just disoriented." A click, then another. Vincent was fumbling for something. A tiny, almost imperceptible red light flickered on, casting his face in a stark, unsettling glow. His brow was furrowed, a network of lines Oliver had only ever seen when a deal went sour. He watched as Vincent's thumb repeatedly pressed the emergency call button. Each press was firm, deliberate, but after a dozen attempts, the only response was a dull, unresponsive click. The faint red light continued to blink uselessly. A muscle in Vincent's jaw twitched. "No signal," he muttered. The words clipped. For the first time, Oliver detected a tremor, a hairline fracture in the CEO's usual granite composure. It was gone almost instantly, replaced by a grim set to his mouth, but Oliver had seen it. The wall had briefly, subtly, cracked. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The air grew stale, heavy with the metallic tang and their shared, unspoken fear. Oliver could feel the claustrophobia creeping in, a cold hand tightening around his throat. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to make himself smaller, less present. After what felt like hours, a sigh escaped Vincent, long and weary. "Well," he said, the word hanging in the air. "This is certainly an unexpected development." His voice was softer now, devoid of its usual sharp edges. Oliver remained silent, unsure how to respond. The darkness made conversation feel intimate, too close for their usual professional distance. More time passed, marked only by the slow rhythmic beat of Oliver's own pulse and the soft creak of the elevator cables. He wondered if anyone would even know they were missing yet. His mind drifted to the overdue projections on his desk, the endless spreadsheets. It felt impossibly distant, a relic of another life. Then Vincent cleared his throat. "You know," he began, his voice surprisingly conversational. "When I was about 7, my dad took me on a fishing trip. We were out on this tiny rowboat, miles from shore, and a storm blew in out of nowhere. The waves were huge, tossing that boat around like a toy. I was terrified, thought we were going to capsize for sure." Oliver's eyes, though useless in the dark, then were fixed on where he imagined Vincent's face to be. This was unexpected. "My dad, he was a calm man, but even he looked a bit green," Vincent continued, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. "He tried to distract me by telling me a story about a giant squid that pulled ships down to the ocean floor. I remember being more scared of the squid than the storm itself. Anyway, we made it back to shore, soaked to the bone and missing half our fishing gear, but I remember him laughing, just roaring with laughter, when we finally stumbled into the house. The silence that followed was different now, lighter, infused with the faint echo of a boy's adventure." Oliver found himself smiling in the darkness. It was a genuine smile, one he hadn't realized he was capable of in their current predicament. Vincent Thorne, the unyielding CEO, now telling a story about giant squids and a laughing father. It was a side of him Oliver had never imagined existed, a glimpse behind the impenetrable facade. The wall, Oliver realized, wasn't just cracked. It was starting to crumble, piece by unexpected piece. "My father always said adversity builds character," Vincent mused, his voice quiet, almost reflective, though I doubt he meant being trapped in a plummeting elevator shaft. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, unseen in the gloom. Oliver, however, felt it, a warmth spreading through the oppressive chill of their shared confinement. He wanted to respond, to share something of himself, but the words still caught in his throat. For now, listening felt like enough. Listening and seeing. Shared laughter in the dark. The confession hung heavy in the air, arm thick with dust and the metallic tang of fear. Vincent's voice, usually a precisely honed weapon, had softened to a near whisper as he recounted a childhood humiliation, a lost dog, a disastrous family reunion. Oliver, habitually stiff under the CEO's scrutiny, found a strange empathy bloom within him, picturing a younger, less formidable Vincent, stripped of his corporate armor. The silence that followed wasn't cumbersome or strained, but surprisingly, intimate. It was a shared space, carved from an unexpected vulnerability. Oliver shifted, the floor's chill seeping into him. He felt Vincent's eyes in the gloom, a silent invitation to reciprocate. His own childhood, far less dramatic, infinitely more mundane, came to mind. What could he possibly offer that wouldn't pale beside such raw disclosure? Then, an image flashed, absurd and endearing. A small orange fin flapping in a tiny bowl. I had a goldfish once," Oliver began, his voice raspy from disuse, then cleared his throat. "Named him Finny. Very original, I know." A soft, almost imperceptible huff of amusement escaped Vincent. Not quite a laugh, but a start. Finny was an escape artist. Not in the traditional sense, obviously. More like a leper. Vincent's interest seemed to sharpen. Oliver, emboldened by the lack of immediate judgment, continued. One morning, I went to feed him, and the bowl was empty. My heart plummeted. I thought, oh no, Mum's finally replaced him with a more normal pet. But then, I looked down. Oliver paused, the scene vivid in his mind. There he was, on the carpet, just lying there, a little dust bunny clinging to his tail. A low, genuine chuckle rumbled from Vincent, a surprising rich sound that echoed strangely in the confined space. I panicked, of course, Oliver went on, a smile tugging at his lips despite the absurdity. Scooped him up, plopped him back in. He just swam around, completely unfazed, like he'd just returned from a grand adventure, ready for tea. Vincent's laughter swelled, a deep, unrestrained sound Oliver had never imagined he possessed. It wasn't the polite, measured chuckle from company events, but a full, chest-shaking guffaw. It was infectious. Oliver found himself laughing too, a light, almost giddy sound that surprised even him. Their combined mirth bounced off the metal walls, a bizarre symphony in the dark. It was a strange, warm feeling, sharing such unburdened joy with the man who typically evoked only nerves and self-doubt. The tension that had coiled around Oliver's shoulders for months, perhaps years, seemed to loosen its grip, if only for this fleeting moment. He did it 3 more times, Oliver managed between gasps, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. Always the carpet. Never the hardwood floor. I swear, he had preferences. Vincent's laughter slowly subsided, leaving a lingering warmth. He took a deep, shuddering breath, almost a sigh of contentment. The darkness seemed less oppressive now, imbued with the fading echoes of their shared amusement. A comfortable silence settled between them, distinct from the previous, expectant quiet. This was a silence of ease, of a shared secret, a brief, genuine connection forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. Oliver could still feel the phantom vibrations of Vincent's laughter, a pleasant hum deep within his own chest. The air still carried the faint scent of metal and dust, but now it also held the faint, sweet memory of unexpected joy. The weight of the boss. The lingering warmth of shared laughter softened the edges of the impeccably designed office, a gentle afterglow in the meticulously structured space. Vincent leaned back, his gaze tracing the sharp angles of the city skyline, a rare vulnerability etched into his features. You know, he began, his voice a low current. It's incredibly isolating at the apex. Everyone looks to you for answers, for the next move. They witness the triumphs, the authority, but they don't see the relentless calculations, the ceaseless weighing of consequences, the gnawing fear of missteps. A deep sigh escaped him. There's no true confidant, no steadying hand. Not when every decision ripples through hundreds of lives, thousands of livelihoods. Oliver observed him, a quiet wave of empathy rising in his chest. He no longer saw the formidable CEO, but a man shouldering an immense burden, grappling with a profound solitude. I can imagine, Oliver responded, his voice surprisingly firm. The pressure must be staggering. Vincent turned from the window, his usually piercing eyes now clouded with a hint of fatigue. Staggering doesn't quite capture it. It's like carrying an unseen weight, a constant, insistent hum of expectation. You must be infallible, unyielding. There's no margin for error, no room for doubt. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, an uncharacteristic, unguarded gesture. Sometimes, I just wish there was someone who truly grasped the sheer magnitude of it all. Oliver, typically reserved with unsolicited opinions, felt a surge of conviction. He swallowed, collecting his thoughts. But that's what makes you so remarkable, Vincent, he blurted out. To bear that immense responsibility, to shoulder those burdens, and still lead with such clarity. I've always found you incredibly courageous for that. And resilient. You navigate complexities most people couldn't even conceive, and you do it with an unwavering resolve. Vincent's head snapped up, his brow furrowed in surprise. He stared at Oliver, his expression unreadable, a flicker of something undefinable in his eyes. He had expected, perhaps, a polite acknowledgement, a sympathetic nod. But not this. Not this raw, unvarnished praise. He had grown accustomed to deference, to the measured respect of his employees, but never had anyone spoken to him with such disarming honesty, devoid of any agenda. Courageous, Vincent repeated, the word alien on his tongue. He had always seen himself as driven, perhaps ruthless, but never brave in the way Oliver described. He had simply acted as required, pursuing what he believed was right for the company. Oliver nodded, a small, earnest smile gracing his lips. Yes, courageous. And strong. You might not perceive it, but from an external vantage, it's undeniable. You confront challenges head-on, you make the difficult calls, and you do it all with a clear vision. That demands immense fortitude. A comfortable, contemplative silence settled between them, quite unlike their usual tense quiet. Vincent didn't immediately dismiss Oliver's words, didn't pivot to a new topic. Instead, he simply looked at Oliver, a thoughtful expression deepening the lines around his eyes. He seemed to genuinely consider Oliver's revelation, turning the words over in his mind like precious, unexpected discoveries. The invisible burden he had described seemed to lighten, if only for a fleeting moment, under the unexpected balm of Oliver's understanding. A secret shared. The confession hung in the air, a delicate thread spun between them in the hush of Vincent's office. Oliver watched the CEO, a man who seemed sculpted from granite and unyielding will, now momentarily softened, his gaze distant as if replaying a private, painful reel. The admission, delivered in a voice stripped of its usual steel, had been simple. Sometimes I'm scared, Oliver. It wasn't a fear of financial ruin, nor the typical anxieties of a CEO. It was a deeper, more primal tremor. One Oliver intuitively understood. He saw past the formidable exterior, the sharp suits, and the cutting remarks, to the man beneath, a man wrestling with the weight of unseen burdens. A profound empathy swelled within Oliver, a warmth that spread through his chest, chasing away the usual chill of Vincent's presence. He saw not a boss, but another human being, vulnerable and exposed, perhaps for the first time in years. Scared of what? Oliver asked, his voice gentle, devoid of judgment. He leaned forward slightly, instinctively wanting to bridge the emotional chasm that had always separated them. Vincent finally met his gaze, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, as if unused to such direct, non-corporate inquiry. He hesitated, then a slow sigh escaped him. Of failing, I suppose. Not just myself, but everyone who trusts me. Of making the wrong call. Of not seeing the hidden flaw, the inevitable downturn, and of being alone with it all. The last words were almost a whisper, laden with a loneliness that resonated with a quiet ache deep within Oliver. Oliver's heart contracted. He suddenly saw the immense solitude of leadership, the relentless pressure to maintain an impenetrable facade. He pictured Vincent in this vast, silent office, long after everyone else had gone home, grappling with the ghosts of decisions past and the anxieties of the future. The image struck him with a surprising force, deepening the connection that had begun to form in the confined space of the elevator. "You're not alone," Oliver said, the words slipping out before he could second-guess them. "Not entirely. You have people who believe in you, who work hard because they respect what you've built." He paused, then added, "And you have me." A subtle shift occurred in Vincent's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of his lips that suggested a breath held, now released. He seemed to absorb Oliver's words, turning them over in his mind. The air between them, usually charged with professional tension, now hummed with something different. A fragile intimacy. I don't often allow myself to think that way, Vincent admitted, his voice rougher now, as if the vulnerability was physically taxing. He gestured vaguely at the cityscape outside the panoramic windows. This world doesn't reward sentimentality. It rewards foresight, ruthless efficiency. And courage, Oliver countered softly. It takes courage to admit fears, to carry such a heavy load, and day after day, and still stand tall. Vincent looked at Oliver, a new intensity in his gaze, a searching quality Oliver had never witnessed before. It was as if he was seeing Oliver for the very first time, not as an employee, but as a confidant. You have a way of seeing things, Oliver, he murmured, a different perspective. He paused. Then a faint smile, almost imperceptible, touched his lips. Do you have any secret fears? Or secret wishes? The question caught Oliver off guard, a sudden invitation into a deeply personal space. He felt a blush creep up his neck, yet the warmth of connection urged him to respond. Secret wishes? He chuckled softly. I suppose everyone does. Mine are probably quite mundane compared to yours. Try me, Vincent urged, his voice surprisingly gentle, leaning back in his chair, and seemingly invested in Oliver's answer. The usual CEO demeanor had receded, replaced by a quiet curiosity. Oliver considered, tracing the rim of his coffee mug. I've always wanted to write a book. Not a business book, just a story. Something that transports people. He looked up, a shy smile on his face. And maybe, to travel somewhere truly remote. To see the stars without any city lights to dim them. A genuine smile, full and unforced, bloomed on Vincent's face. It transformed his features, softening the sharp angles, making him appear remarkably approachable. A writer, he mused, a hint of wonder in his tone. I wouldn't have guessed. And seeing the stars. A good wish. Mine, he began, his gaze drifting back to the city, but this time with a hint of wistfulness. Mine is to find a quiet place, away from all this. The noise, the expectations. To simply be, without the Thorn and Company name attached. The shared admissions created an undeniable current between them, a silent understanding passing back and forth. Oliver felt a profound sense of privilege, of being trusted with something precious. The emotional distance that had always defined their interactions had dissolved, replaced by a delicate, nascent bond. In the vastness of Vincent's office, surrounded by symbols of power and success, they had found a small, intimate clearing where two souls could simply exist, unguarded and open. A flutter in the dim light. The confession hung in the air, a fragile thing that shimmered between them in the dim office light. The city outside, usually a vibrant tapestry of sound, felt muted, as if holding its breath. Vincent, stripped bare of his usual executive armor, looked at Oliver. Truly looked at him. Not as an employee, not as a source of irritation or a vessel for his own anxieties, but as a person. He saw the gentle curve of Oliver's lips, a subtle warmth that often went unnoticed beneath the weight of office stress. He noticed the slight crinkle at the corners of Oliver's eyes, testament to a kindness that seemed to radiate from within. There was no judgment in that gaze, only a profound, quiet understanding. It was a mirror reflecting back not his failures, but his humanity, a sight Vincent hadn't encountered in years, perhaps never truly in this raw, unvarnished way. A strange sensation bloomed in Vincent's chest, unexpected and disorienting. It wasn't the familiar claw of anxiety or the dull ache of loneliness. This was softer, a delicate flutter, bit like the wings of a captive bird finally finding release. It was unsettling, yet not unwelcome. He'd spent so long building walls, reinforcing them with ambition and stoicism, that to feel something so tender, so open, was a shock to his system. He found himself wanting to lean into it, to understand this new warmth that was thawing the permafrost around his heart. Oliver, for his part, felt it too. A new, warm glow of affection for Vincent. It wasn't the distant admiration he'd held for his formidable CEO, nor the empathetic concern that had blossomed during their shared ordeal. This was different, a deeper resonance that hummed with a quiet intensity. Seeing Vincent so vulnerable, so utterly human, had shattered the imposing image he usually projected. Oliver saw past the CEO, past the demanding exterior, onto the man beneath. A man burdened by immense pressure, profoundly isolated, and surprisingly, achingly lonely. He wanted to reach out, to offer a physical comfort, but hesitated. The boundaries, though blurred, still existed. Instead, he offered a small, reassuring smile. "It's a lot to carry, Vincent. You don't have to do it alone." The words, simple as they were, resonated with a truth Vincent hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. He had always believed leadership meant solitary endurance. To hear someone offer to share the burden, not out of obligation but genuine care, was revolutionary. I've never thought of it that way," Vincent admitted, his voice rough. He cleared his throat, pushing a hand through his already disheveled hair. Always assumed it was part of the job description, the silent burden. Oliver chuckled softly, a sound that was surprisingly soothing in the quiet room. Maybe some burdens are meant to be shared, even if it's just in the telling. The air thickened, not with tension, but with an unspoken understanding. The professional distance that had defined their relationship for so long felt like a flimsy veil, easily pierced. Vincent found himself studying Oliver again. The way the soft light caught the subtle flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the earnestness in his expression. This quiet, unassuming man, whom he'd often dismissed as overly cautious or lacking the aggressive drive he valued, possessed a strength of spirit he was only now beginning to truly appreciate. A strength that offered solace, not challenge. The flutter in Vincent's chest intensified, a curious mix of apprehension and exhilaration. It was a feeling entirely new, one entirely unexpected, and he didn't quite know what to make of it. All he knew was that in this dimly lit office, with the city's hum a distant memory, Oliver's presence was a beacon, warm and steady, in the vast, cold expanse of his life. Oliver felt the weight of Vincent's gaze, a new intensity that wasn't critical or demanding, but searching. It sent a shiver down his spine, a pleasant current that warmed him from the inside out. He found himself wanting to stay in this moment, suspended in the fragile intimacy they had forged. The world outside, with its deadlines and demands, seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them, bathed in the soft, fading light. A silent testament to a connection neither had anticipated. The seeds of something profound had been sown, and in the quiet of the office they had just begun to sprout. The return to brightness. A sudden, violent lurch threw Oliver forward, catching himself on the cool metal wall. The lights, which had been dim and flickering, flared to full brightness with a soft hum. The elevator car groaned, a sound of heavy machinery awakening, and then began to rise with an almost imperceptible smoothness. The ascent was short, barely a few seconds, but in that brief span, the air between them shifted. The intimacy, the fragile understanding that had blossomed in the confined space, was already beginning to recede, like the tide pulling back from the shore. The doors slid open with a soft, pneumatic hiss, revealing the stark, fluorescent brilliance of the 18th floor hallway. It was a jarring contrast to the dim, confessional space they had just inhabited. The muted tones of their conversation were instantly swallowed by the distant murmur of the office, the clatter of keyboards, and the faint ring of a telephone. It was as if a curtain had been drawn, separating their shared experience from the relentless grind of their professional lives. Vincent stepped out first, his movements swift and decisive, a stark return to his usual commanding demeanor. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance back. His perfectly tailored suit seemed to stiffen, his shoulders squaring as he strode away, his pace quickening with each step. It was a retreat, a calculated withdrawal, leaving no room for a lingering word, no space for a shared look. He was gone, absorbed by the sterile expanse of the hallway, a dark, receding figure against the brightly lit backdrop. Oliver remained in the elevator for a moment longer, the bright light from the hallway casting his shadow long behind him. A hollow ache settled in his chest, a pang of something akin to sadness, tinged with confusion. He watched Vincent's retreating form until it disappeared around a corner, leaving only the echo of his footsteps. The warmth that had permeated the small space, the surprising connection they had forged, felt like a dream evaporating in the harsh light of day. He stepped out into the hallway, the polished marble floor gleaming under the overhead lights. The office hummed with its usual relentless energy, a stark reminder of the world they had momentarily escaped. He felt disoriented, as though he had been dropped back into a familiar landscape after a long journey to an unknown land. The weight of his briefcase, forgotten for hours, felt heavy in his hand. His gaze drifted to the elevator doors, which were now sliding closed, sealing off the space that had witnessed their unexpected confession. He pressed the call button for his own floor, his fingers tracing the cool metal. The elevator dinged, a new car arriving to take him down. As he waited, he replayed Vincent's words in his mind, the raw vulnerability in his voice, the admission of loneliness that had pierced through his carefully constructed facade. Had it been real? Or merely a product of their confinement, a temporary aberration brought on by stress and fear? The abruptness of Vincent's departure, the lack of even a parting glance, suggested the latter. It was as if the moment had been quarantined, confined to the elevator, and now that they were free, it was to be forgotten, erased. He sighed, a quiet exhalation that went unnoticed in the bustling hallway. The new elevator arrived, its doors opening to reveal an empty car. He stepped inside, the chill of the air conditioning a stark contrast to the lingering warmth in his memory. As the doors closed, he felt a profound sense of loss, a quiet disappointment that settled deep within him. The connection, however fragile, however fleeting, had been real to him, and now it was gone, leaving him adrift in its wake. He wondered if Vincent felt anything similar, or if he had simply shed the moment like an old skin, ready to resume his carefully constructed life. The answer, Oliver suspected, would remain a mystery. The cold silence. The elevator doors had sealed shut on more than just a moment. They'd entombed something fragile, something unspoken. Now, beneath the stark office fluorescence, that delicacy seemed to have shattered. Vincent Thorne, once a commanding presence, was now a spectre, gliding through the open-plan office. His gaze, once direct, now seemed to skate across the surface of Oliver's desk, never quite alighting. Emails from Vincent, formerly sharp and often critical, became clipped, delegating tasks through his assistant, Brenda, or carbon-copying Oliver on messages clearly meant for broader teams. The air around Oliver's cubicle, previously charged with a strange tension, now felt simply frigid. Oliver found himself glancing up far too often, a habit he couldn't seem to break. He'd catch glimpses of Vincent in the distance, hunched over a laptop in a secluded conference room, or vanishing into his private office, the door clicking shut with an air of absolute finality. The brief, almost intimate connection they'd shared in the ascending box, the fleeting vulnerability in Vincent's eyes, felt like a dream conjured by a lack of oxygen. Reality, by contrast, was this sharp, isolating silence. Its weight settled in his chest, a dull, pervasive ache. He yearned for the tension, even the critical edge, because at least that had signified engagement. This absence, this deliberate avoidance, was far worse, making the air feel thin, almost unbreathable. Brenda, usually a lively fount of office observations, seemed to perceive the shift as well. Occasionally, she'd cast a concerned look Oliver's way, her lips tightening sympathetically. One afternoon, a steaming mug of tea appeared on his desk, unbidden. "Rough morning," she murmured, her voice a low current of empathy. Oliver merely nodded, stirring the tea, the clinking of the spoon the sole sound between them. He couldn't articulate the specific roughness, only an overarching desolation. Meanwhile, Vincent battled an internal tempest. The memory of the elevator, of Oliver's quiet presence, his steady gaze, the unexpected warmth of his hand, clung to him like a stubborn, unwelcome scent. It was deeply unsettling. He was Vincent Thorne, CEO of Thorne & Co., a man who trafficked in facts, figures, and decisive action, not feelings. The vulnerability he'd briefly allowed himself had been a lapse, a momentary weakness induced by stress and proximity. He replayed the scene, dissecting it, striving to categorize it, to strip it of any personal significance. It was an anomaly, a blip, a reaction to an unusual circumstance, nothing more. He buried himself in work, driving himself and his team harder than ever. He pulled up Oliver's financial projections, scrutinizing them with an intensity that bordered on aggression, hunting for any flaw, any mathematical misstep that might justify a return to their old dynamic. He needed to re-establish the clear professional boundary that had, for a dangerous moment, blurred. He needed to prove to himself that Oliver was just another employee, capable, perhaps, but ultimately interchangeable. Yet, each time he saw Oliver's name on a report, or caught a fleeting glimpse of him through the glass partition, a strange tremor ran through him. He found himself avoiding direct confrontation, not because he lacked the authority, but because he couldn't quite trust his own composure. The cold silence he enforced wasn't solely for Oliver. It was a desperate attempt to quell the burgeoning chaos within himself. The office hummed its usual mechanical symphony of keyboards and hushed phone calls. But for Oliver, the melody had changed. It no longer felt like the busy, challenging place he'd come to respect. Instead, it was a cavernous, echoing space, amplifying the absence of a connection he hadn't even realized he'd craved until it was gone. The professional distance had returned, starker and colder than before, leaving him with a hollow ache and a gnawing confusion about what, exactly, had transpired in those few private minutes. Haunted by kind eyes. The polished surface of Vincent's mahogany desk reflected the city lights outside, a scattered constellation against the dark wood. He stared at it, not seeing the lights, but a pair of soft hazel eyes. Oliver's eyes. They had held concern, then confusion, and finally a profound sadness that had pricked at something deep within Vincent. He'd tried to dismiss it, to bury it under layers of professional detachment and the relentless demands of his empire. Yet, the memory persisted, a stubborn ghost haunting his otherwise ordered mind. His usual sharp focus had fractured. Board meetings felt like distant echoes, the hum of the trading floor a dull throb. He found himself replaying moments, fragments of conversations. The way Oliver's brow furrowed slightly when he was concentrating. The gentle cadence of his voice when he spoke about anything other than work. It was infuriating. Vincent Thorne did not get distracted. He did not dwell on junior employees, especially not in such a personal way. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. It wasn't just the eyes. It was the warmth that radiated from Oliver, a quiet kindness that chipped away at the cynical shell Vincent had meticulously built around himself over decades. Vincent had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to compartmentalize emotions, to see the world in black and white, profit and loss. But Oliver introduced a spectrum of color he hadn't known existed, or at least hadn't allowed himself to see. The thought of feeling something for a man, let alone Oliver, sent a jolt of discomfort through him. His identity, his entire self-perception, was rooted in a very specific, heterosexual framework. He dated women, beautiful, accomplished women who fit seamlessly into his public image. This was uncharted territory, a dangerous precipice from which he recoiled instinctively. He'd shut Oliver out precisely to avoid this internal reckoning. He'd needed to reassert control, to re-establish the rigid boundaries that defined his existence. But the more he pushed Oliver away, the closer Oliver seemed to become in his thoughts. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Eleanor Vance, his executive assistant, stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable as always, yet her eyes held a subtle knowingness that always unnerved him. "Mr. Thorne, the final figures for the Q3 projections are ready for your review," she stated, her voice smooth and devoid of inflection. She placed a sleek tablet on the corner of his desk, precisely angled for him to pick up. Vincent nodded, forcing himself to focus on the task. "Thank you, Eleanor." She paused, her gaze sweeping over his slightly disheveled appearance, a detail she would never comment on directly. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Thorne?" Her tone was polite, professional, yet a faint undertone of observation lingered in the air. Eleanor rarely missed a beat. She saw the flickers of emotion he tried so desperately to conceal, the subtle shifts in his demeanor that no one else dared to acknowledge. "Perfectly satisfactory, Eleanor," he replied, his voice a fraction too sharp. He picked up the tablet, pretending to immerse himself in the complex data, hoping she would take her leave. He could feel her quiet scrutiny, like a phantom weight on his shoulders. Eleanor, however, remained. "I've noticed a slight deviation in your usual schedule, Mr. Thorne, and your focus, while still exceptional, appears somewhat diffused." Vincent's jaw tightened. He disliked being analyzed, especially by an employee, no matter how indispensable. "I assure you, Eleanor, my focus is entirely on the company's performance." A ghost of a smile, almost imperceptible, touched her lips. "Of course, sir. It's merely an observation. Perhaps a change of pace is beneficial from time to time." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Reed submitted his report on the Jensen account this afternoon. It's quite thorough." The mention of Oliver's name was a deliberate barb, a testament to Eleanor's astute perception. Vincent felt a familiar rush of irritation, mixed with something else, a strange flicker of warmth. He merely grunted in response, his eyes still fixed on the tablet, though the numbers swam before him. Eleanor finally departed, leaving Vincent alone in the quiet hum of his office, the ghost of Oliver's kind eyes once again drifting into his mind's eye, a persistent, unwelcome, and utterly captivating presence. The carefully constructed walls of his self-control felt less like fortresses and more like crumbling facades. The unspoken truth. The late afternoon sun, usually a welcome visitor in Vincent's office, now felt like an unwelcome spotlight, highlighting the disarray within him. He stared at a meticulously organized spreadsheet, lines of data blurring into an indecipherable mess. His usual sharp focus, a weapon honed over decades, had deserted him. It had been days, a relentless parade of hours since he had felt truly present. Every thought, every stray glance, every flicker of memory led him back to Oliver. He slammed a fist quietly on his desk, the thud absorbed by the thick mahogany. This was unsustainable. The carefully constructed fortress of his self-control was crumbling, brick by painstaking brick. He could no longer dismiss the persistent ache in his chest, the phantom warmth on his skin, the echo of Oliver's quiet laughter. This wasn't just a fleeting distraction, a momentary aberration. This was something profound, something terrifyingly real. Vincent pushed away from his desk, the leather of his chair groaning in protest. He walked to the vast window, overlooking the city that hummed with purpose beneath him. He had always been a man of purpose, of clear objectives and decisive action. Now, he felt adrift, caught in an unfamiliar current. He had spent his entire adult life operating under the assumption of a rigid, unyielding heterosexuality, a self-definition as integral to him as his own name. Oliver had shattered that illusion with a single, unassuming smile, with a shared vulnerability in the cramped confines of a stopped elevator. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at him. What did this mean? For his identity, for his carefully curated life, for his future. He was Vincent Thorne, a titan of industry, a man who commanded respect and instilled a healthy dose of fear. He was not supposed to feel this unsettling tenderness, this disorienting yearning for another man, especially not a junior employee. The thought felt like a betrayal of everything he believed himself to be. He remembered the touch of Oliver's hand, brief but electric during their confinement. He remembered the quiet strength in Oliver's eyes, the unexpected solace he'd found in his presence. And then, the abrupt retreat, the wall he'd slammed back up, the professional distance he'd tried so desperately to re-establish. It had been a reflex, a desperate attempt to regain control of a situation that threatened to unravel him. But the damage was done. The seeds of something new, something terrifyingly beautiful, had already taken root. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble of an unshaved chin, another sign of his unraveling routine. He needed to talk to Oliver. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a desire, but an imperative, a primal urge that superseded all logic and fear. He couldn't go on like this, lost in a labyrinth of unspoken emotions and confused desires. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of his office. What would he say? How would he even begin to articulate the earthquake that had shaken his carefully constructed world? Would Oliver understand? Or would he simply see a confused, perhaps even pathetic, older man grappling with an unexpected crisis? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through him. Yet, beneath the fear, a different sensation stirred, a fragile, nascent hope. A hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Oliver might feel something too. That the connection they had forged, however brief and unconventional, had been real for both of them. He had to know. He couldn't live with the uncertainty, the nagging questions that plagued his every waking moment. Vincent walked back to his desk, his movements more deliberate now. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the intercom button that connected him directly to Eleanor. "Eleanor," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, "cancel my remaining appointments for the day. And, could you find Oliver's current schedule? I need to speak with him." The words, once spoken, felt like a colossal weight lifted from his shoulders. The fear remained, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now accompanied by a surge of resolve. He was stepping into the unknown, walking away from the comfortable, predictable path he had always trodden. He didn't know where this conversation would lead, or what truths it would uncover. But he knew, with a certainty that transcended all doubt, that he had to try. He had to confront the unspoken truth. A heart's confession. The chime of his intercom felt like a death knell, echoing the frantic rhythm of Vincent's own heart. "Oliver, could you step into my office?" His voice, usually a steady baritone, and I had a slight tremor, a barely perceptible waver that only he could detect. He didn't wait for a reply, just disconnected, leaving the sterile silence of his office to amplify his anxieties. The oak door, usually a barrier against the chaos of the outside world, felt like a portal to an unknown future. He stood, rigid, at the expansive window overlooking the city, his back to the door. The familiar panorama of steel and glass, usually a source of calm control, offered no solace. Each passing moment stretched, an elastic band pulled taut, threatening to snap. He heard the soft click of the door, then the faint rustle of fabric as Oliver stepped inside. Vincent didn't turn. He couldn't. Not yet. He needed a moment more to compose the storm raging within him. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Thorne?" Oliver's voice was soft, inquiring, a gentle counterpoint to Vincent's internal turmoil. Vincent closed his eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and finally turned. Oliver stood a few feet from the door, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, his posture open yet wary. His brow was slightly furrowed, a hint of concern in his kind eyes. Vincent's gaze, usually sharp and assessing, softened as it landed on Oliver. The severe lines around his mouth eased, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the mask of the formidable CEO slipped entirely. Oliver, accustomed to Vincent's usual glacial demeanor, was struck by the change. The intensity in Vincent's eyes was still there, but it was no longer cold. It was warm, almost vulnerable. A flicker of something unreadable passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken shifts in their dynamic. Vincent swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. The words he'd rehearsed, the carefully constructed sentences, all vanished, replaced by a raw, unyielding truth that demanded to be spoken. He walked slowly, deliberately, around his desk, stopping just a few feet from Oliver. The distance felt both vast and negligible. "Oliver," he began, his voice rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. I asked you here because there's something I need to say. Something important." Oliver's gaze remained steady, patient, a silent invitation to continue. Vincent took another deep breath, the air burning in his lungs. This was it. The precipice. He could retreat, revert to his old self, bury it all beneath layers of professionalism and denial. Or he could jump. He looked at Oliver, truly looked at him, and saw not just an employee, but a man who had, against all odds, unlocked a part of him he never knew existed. He saw the quiet strength, the unwavering empathy, the gentle spirit that had somehow pierced through his carefully constructed defenses. "Oliver," he repeated, his voice gaining a newfound strength, a tremor of emotion underlying the words. "What happened between us? In the elevator? It changed everything for me. You changed everything." He paused, searching for the right words, words that felt inadequate for the seismic shift within his soul. "I've spent my life building walls, living by rules, convinced I knew exactly who I was, what I wanted. And then you came along, and you dismantled it all without even trying." Oliver's expression remained unreadable, a silent testament to his quiet nature. He simply listened, his presence a comforting anchor in Vincent's tumultuous confession. Vincent took another breath, a confession not just to Oliver, but to himself. "I fought it, Oliver. God, I fought it with everything I had. I pushed you away. I tried to deny it, because it was terrifying, disorienting, to feel something so profound, so unexpected, for someone, for you." His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were now soft, vulnerable, reflecting the depth of his revelation. "I've never felt this way before. Not for anyone. And I know it's unconventional, unexpected. But I can't ignore it anymore. I can't pretend it doesn't exist." His gaze locked with Oliver's, a silent plea for understanding, for acceptance. The air in the office crackled with a palpable tension, a blend of fear and hope. Finally, the words came, raw and unfiltered, when tearing past the last vestiges of his carefully constructed defenses. "Oliver," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I've fallen in love with you." The silence that followed was deafening, pregnant with the weight of Vincent's confession. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden stillness. He watched Oliver's face, searching for any flicker of emotion, any sign of reciprocation, dreading rejection, yet ready to face it. He had bared his soul. There was no turning back now.